Okay, hopefully everyone can see that now. All right, Jess, do you want to go ahead and kick this off?
Yes. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning. And I thank you. I see a lot of people have joined. We've got almost 80 people here. So thank you very much for responding to the training and coming. So this is our compliance review training. This is really a kickoff meeting to introduce you to the triennial compliance review process. So we're just going to be going over a lot of information today that you will use once you are in a compliance review. So this is really just to introduce you to the whole process, get you familiar with the team that will be conducting the compliance reviews, and go from there. So next slide. Oh, I'm Jess Maffey. I'm the 5310 program manager. Many of you probably know me. It looks like Pam has a question. Pam, you should be able to unmute yourself if with the mic button, I think.
Yeah, I can't see anything.
Okay.
Is that everyone? Can other people confirm that, or is it just Pam?
I can see okay.
I can see fine.
Okay.
I can see fine too.
I can see
fine.
Okay, Pam, you might want to just go out and come back in and maybe see if you can see it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for confirming that. We always want to know where the potential issue is, so thank you.
Yeah. Nathan, did you have a question? Okay. All right, I'm going to keep going for now. So just a few housekeeping items. So obviously we'll have slides. If for whatever reason you can't see and you just need to listen in, you can access the audio by your phone or computer speaker. So there's a number you can call on the invite. Don't use both. If you're on your phone audio, you can mute your computer speaker. So far, it looks like everyone is probably just on their computer, but just a note. You came in on mute, but please keep yourself muted unless you have a question, and then you can raise your hand and come off mute. And yeah, if you for some reason come off mute during the meeting and we hear some background chatter, we'll go ahead and mute you. The other thing to note is that the session will be recorded. We will send it out later. I know some people have already kindly messaged me that they might have to leave a little early. That's fine. We'll send you everything after the presentation. So with that, I'm gonna kind of hand it over to the KFH team to introduce themselves and take us through the training.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Jeff. I'm Joel Eisenfeld with KFH Group. I have done a number of these over the years. I've probably met a lot of you along the way. Also with us in the training is Sarah Lasky, who will also be performing these, and Ben Dohan will be assisting us, as well as you'll have other people from KFH along the way when we're actually virtually on site, as we like to call it. In the past, before the pandemic, we used to do on-site, and going in the future, there's always some possibility that we might do some depending on technical assistance or other aspects. But as we found that nowadays we're very capable of handling a lot of this. So the process of this, let me give you a little kind of background. So the agenda is we're going to talk about the different review areas that you'll be seeing when you receive your workbook and you'll do the virtual review. A lot of this is technical assistance aspect of it. At the end of this, we're going to ask if there's any questions or comments, but please feel free during this. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead. We have people either watching for raise hand. If you put something in the chat or Q&A, we're also monitoring that, so we can go ahead and pause and go ahead and address those. And at the end, then we'll go ahead and do a wrap up. So one of the things is we want to obviously discuss is the what the objectives of the training. So it's really kind of looking at your compliance review procedures and what that entails. So really what this is an overview of federal programs, guidance, and resources, and looking at both federal state requirements. And there's basic requirements and kind of what is being reviewed. But before we even get to that, for those especially who are new to this, this is not a gotcha exercise. This is not something that is punitive. This is not something that we're looking to go ahead and find. We're here to kind of, in my mind, reflect and show everything that you're doing right. And if there's something that needs to be addressed, that's the intent of this. So when you fill out your workbook or sending in documents or even talking to reviewers, we're not looking for you to necessarily say, oh, I know the right answer. I'm going to say this. We want you to tell us what you're doing. And if it's the right answer, that's great. If it's not, we want to get you to the right answer or get you to the right policies or procedures. So we want to make sure that what you're doing is reflective of what the requirements are of both the federal and state level. And realistically, this is something that, you might have some what we call findings, and that is not a bad thing. That is just something either you didn't know or something that we need to address. And a lot of this stems from that DRPT themselves get what they call a state management review by the federal government. And then so what part of their requirements are oversight of subrecipients, you guys. And so this is part of that process. The grant application is part of it. They're kind of technical assistance. So all these rolled together show that they are providing support and oversight and ensuring that because you're receiving federal dollars, that they are aware of what your policies and procedures are, and you're doing it in a fashion that meets the requirements of the federal government. So what does a typical schedule look like when we go ahead and roll this out? So approximately 6 weeks prior to our virtual visit, we're going to send you you'll be contacted by DRPT, and you're provided a date for your review. There's some wiggle room, but realistically, we have a lot of these to do. So, I mean, there are certain circumstances that we're going to go ahead and work with you. There's some that we're just like, okay, depending on that, we're going to have to go ahead and try to see what we can work out. But again, the ultimate goal is to make sure that you have the right people there, and have time to go ahead and fill this out to give us the necessary information that we need. In that, DRPT is going to provide what we call a compliance review workbook in that correspondence. And in that workbook, there's a couple things. It kind of lays out what the review is going to look like. It gives you a list of documents that are requested to send in prior to the virtual review. It's a bisection of different lists of questions that we are asking to kind of get an idea of what you have, policies and procedures, what your protocol is. So that way, when we do the virtual, it's a lot quicker, and a lot of things have already been addressed prior to this, or at least gives the reviewer a chance to have an idea of where to probe a little further and to assist you in a manner. By no means are we going to go over every single question of the workbook at that virtual review. That is not the intent of it, because then why have you fill out in advance? It's just to give the reviewer a good idea of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and things that we want to go ahead and kind of delve a little deeper in. So that workbook we're going to ask to complete and return it to KFH 2 weeks prior to your review. So that's the point where we call that's our desk review, or what we call our homework. So basically, we have 2 weeks then to review what you sent us, and sometimes even then get back and correspond to you prior to your virtual review saying, hey, can you clarify this, or we're missing this document, so that way we can be as efficient as possible at the time of your virtual review. And then as appropriate, like I said, we're going to send, you'll send a different information, we'll request different things, and then we'll be ready for the review. And we say the on-site. The on-site is the actual virtual review. So here's the review procedures, kind of give you a nutshell. And by the way, when Jess sends out the transcript, we'll also send out these PowerPoint slides so that you'll have this, as well to refer back to. So the first thing is DRPT contacts you, as we mentioned, to schedule the review and the workbook. And then your homework, you complete the questionnaire, and you're going to upload supportive documents. So we'll kind of document how you can either upload or email directly to us. And then what we'll do is then we take the time from everything that you provide to us, that we do our desk review and request additional information. And then we conduct a virtual review. So the entrance conference is an introduction of ourselves, kind of getting a little background of yourself and what you do. And then at that point, we take the areas of interest or concern and we, as I mentioned, delve a little deeper and then discuss the next steps at the end of that. And typically these go anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending on how much information is provided, the type of funding that you receive, potentially, any areas or things of concern. And then at that point, we work with DRPT and we put together what we call a corrective action plan. And basically that's just a kind of a document that discusses what happened, what documents that were received, any areas that we feel maybe have some deficiencies or areas that need to be addressed. And then you work with DRPT to go ahead and address that, and then you get a final report. So before we move on, there's some things that you probably or hopefully know that you have, and DRPT has this on their website if you don't directly, is key guidance pertinent specific to DRPT Section 5310 funding. So you have your grant application guidance, which I'm pretty sure most of you have because you've submitted an application in the past to DRPT, but also talks about grant management procedures. And this is a real valuable document, often to start with when you're not sure what you might need or information that you're trying to collect. And then other really two areas of key aspects that you can tap into is Jess. I would always, when in doubt, contact Jess because she'll give you, direct guidance or at least kind of do some research for you to help you. And then other Section 5310 recipients are often a good use of resources that, what have they done, things they've seen, aspects do you have policies and procedures? But often what Jess has is she has ones that she feels are best practices and then can often either refer you to those individuals or agencies or provide them to you directly. Some other Section 5310 guidance that is pertinent to this discussion overall is the circular. So the federal circular is the one that you receive directly. The federal government dictates from that federal funding what are the eligible recipients, what are eligible programs, and the kind of the guidelines behind that. And that's your Enhanced Mobility of Seniors, Individuals with Disabilities Program Guidance. And that was just recently updated in 2024. There's also other guidance depending on the type of funding that you receive and what you do in terms of the procurement of anything, whether it be capital or operating and operating process, as well as kind of thresholds that you might meet as an agency. So, for example, you could have third-party contracting guidance if you went ahead and you provide operating assistance and you contract that out. Title VI requirements guidelines are for anyone who received federal dollars. There's ADA and there's, for example, EEO program. There's different levels of that, but often at a minimum, we want to make sure that your agency has that. And how are you utilizing that? For example, when you do a job application, are you showing that you have EEO, you follow EEO and that you have it listed for that and directly so individuals know that you do have an EEO policy. So within the workbook, you'll see review areas, and these are all your review areas that we're going to tap into. And doesn't mean that you have each of these. It's just these are the ones that we address and discuss with you. And then as such, if you do, what your policies and your procedures are to go ahead and direct those. So some of them, for example, organizational management, governance, legal authority, everyone has, or at least that with everyone we're going to be addressing. There's technical capacity, and that often is reporting. So how you're collecting your data and reporting to DRPT, your financial management, what you're, if you're kind of billing, collecting things in that capacity, when you're putting your grants together, do you have the funding necessary to go ahead for match, things to that capacity. Satisfactory continuing control, we'll discuss that in more detail. As I mentioned earlier, personnel, so your equal employment opportunity. Maintenance is always one that we like to highlight, especially the majority of traditional 5310 funding goes to the purchase of capital and the operation of that capital. So the maintenance is always a key aspect that we look into and want to ensure that maintenance is done to make sure that the federal government's funding of these vehicles is being utilized and maintained satisfactory to what their thresholds and levels that they deem. You have service provision, safety and security, Americans with Disabilities Act, Title VI, so the non-discrimination of delivery of service. And then the last two, or I shouldn't say last two, charter bus and school bus are ones that people often are thinking, well, how does that pertain to me? And does it? And so we'll go over that with you to kind of direct where those areas are, what are eligibility options for things that are considered that, and, you know, if not, kind of documentation that you need to have. And then the last thing is coordination, that every 5310 recipient needs to be identified in a human service coordinated plan. And DRPT is actually updating theirs now. So Jess will talk about that a little more later on when we get to that topic. So as I mentioned, what you're going to receive is what we call the Specialized Transportation Compliance Workbook. And the workbook content we want your agency overview. So talk a little about your agency, the jurisdiction that you serve, the clientele or population that you assist with the federal dollars that you're receiving. There's going to be kind of like a process overview in terms of the background of what we're doing, the requested documents, as I mentioned, and then we call it the questionnaire. So questions by each review area to try to keep the volume down of the pages that we provide you. Often these questions are, how can I put it, are not necessarily as specific as we'd like, but because of that, there might be some confusion. Don't worry, answer to the best of your ability. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and or when we get on site, we might clarify, oh, we understand that you maybe thought of the question as this, we were really asking that, you know, and then we will work with you to go ahead and address those questions if there's any ambiguity or things that we're not clear on, or maybe you weren't clear on, as well as an attendance sheet. We want to document who was there, you know, what individuals that you have within your agency who help operate and utilize the services necessary for the transportation that you provide. All right, so governance and organizational management is kind of the lead thing. Before I get started on that, is there any questions or comments or anything anyone want to address before we kind of jump into that? All right. We will keep going then. So governance and legal authority, you kind of think of, well, why do I need that? What is the point of this? And we'll kind of talk about that. So it's the legal authority. Anyone who is applying for the 5310 funding need to have the federal certifications and assurances and have those signed within the application. And then the last thing are the federal clauses. And often those are pertinent as well in procurements and other things if you're going ahead and using the federal dollars for any procurements that you're doing. And sometimes people think, well, you know, I do operating, but I don't do procurement. But you might think, well, is the operating dollars used for purchase of fuel or purchase of other stuff? So those are little things that maybe aren't as procurement, but are in the federal eyes. And so as we, you know, get out to you and talk to you, we might be probing or asking aspects like that. So legal authority, what are the requirements? So your legal capacity to receive federal and state grants. Well, what does that mean? It basically asks, are you eligible as a subrecipient to receive it? Do you meet the federal requirements of state? And also, do you have an authorizing resolution? And we'll talk about that in a second. So eligible to receive 5310 are private nonprofits, 501(c)(3)s, and this is documented in the agency's either articles of incorporation or IRS documents, something to reflect that for us to make sure that you are an eligible recipient of 5310 through the DRPT. And then also our officials acting on behalf of the agency must have the appropriate authority. So we want to make sure that the individual or yourself or whoever's applying for funds has actually been approved by the agency to act on the agency's behalf, because you're required to provide a local match. And we want to make sure that also you have the ability and the knowledge and the backing of your board or others that you are applying for these federal dollars, and there are stipulations tied to those. So the definition of source of authority is often what we're going to ask for. And, so we call that the authorizing resolution. And, do you have that documentation? Is there a board, either resolution or board minutes, basically backing that we're going to review and make sure that you have, so that way we are comfortable knowing that you went ahead and applied these and had the support of your agency. And then as well as if you're a private nonprofit, your 501c3 certification. So the next thing is the technical capacity, and what this means is your ability to manage FTA and DRPT grant funds. So do you have grant management, reporting, things to that. So once you receive these, it kind of doesn't say, okay, I purchased my vehicle, I'm done, the requirements that I have. Well, no, it goes beyond that. It's things that we want to make sure that you have the ability, because DRPT is required to collect data and submit it to FTA as the direct recipient, and then pass that on to you as the subrecipient. So the requirements as such are, do you have the technical capacity to manage grants and comply with federal and state requirements? So basically using sound management practices. And often you'll think, well, of course I do, but what DLP will look at is that if you can't report to them on time, or you're not getting back to them. So technical capacity is more than just being able to provide the service, is that can you provide the information they need in a timely basis, so that way they can do the reports back to FTA. And then one other thing in that is kind of grant closeout. And a lot of this is, if you have approaching capital, it's pretty cut and dry. It's non-issue. It's more when you have operating that you should be able to, or need to be able to, close out grants within 60 days of fully expending all of your work or of the funds. And so FTA really hones in on open grants and grants that they can't close. And so that's why DRPT often is making sure that you're providing them this information in a timely manner. So what we'll look at is your grant management procedures, how you go about identifying grants, who's involved, applying for grants, what the process is. Do you have the adequate staff, not only to apply for, but knowledge of finance, operations, maintenance, things like that are tied to your 5310 funding and the things that you're receiving. And then if you have contractors, or if you are contracting out, what is your oversight and what are those process and policies that you have to make sure that they're doing things correctly, because ultimately they are your subrecipients. They are the ones that are handling the federal dollars that you've collected, but it's your responsibility to make sure they are doing it in a correct manner. So what kind of reporting? When we say reporting, and most of you probably already know this already, is that DRPT has quarterly service operating information. It's collecting information about ridership and other things that they need to collect, and then ultimately to determine if it's making best use of those dollars that you receive for capital and such, as well as reporting to FTA. Financial and safety security information to DRPT upon request and a time at time of application. So during your application, you're going ahead and provide them that information. But if they feel there's something that happened, or they get directive by FTA, these are things that they might reach out to one or multiple agencies to go ahead and collect this information. And then your monthly request for reimbursement. And what they often want is to see this in a manner. They want the backup data. They want it to be, to make sense, logical, and then to work with you if it's being provided in a manner that they can't identify what you're providing and matching up to the cost that you have that you're requesting reimbursement for. You must maintain financial records for at least 3 years after the expiration of the grant, or until DRPT no longer has a lien on agency vehicles. And a lot of this ties back to, what is your retention policy? So do you have a retention policy, or if, at a minimum, you need to document that these are the requirements for the FTA 5310 funding that you received and associated with both your records and operating and or capital that you have. And then really important, and hopefully no one ever has to go through this, but we all do know that things happen, is that reporting accidents and incidents and civil rights complaints to DOPT as soon as possible. So they need to have this information because as part of it is they're collecting it. And then if either FTA or someone at the level goes ahead and inquires, that they are able to have the accurate and appropriate information that they can share this, that is critical both so that way they have records of it as well as they aren't blindsided by not being aware that these things occurred out in the field. So kind of to review again is your report submission history, what you're reporting to the DOPT we're going to look at. Is it on time? Is it sufficient? Are you providing the information they need? And then record retention policy. So the next section is financial management. And under that is, what is your financial capacity? Are you able to pay for what the match of your receiving, as well as the ongoing financial responsibilities of upkeep of that vehicle or the operations of what you're receiving funding from, even if it's operating, or mobility management as well. And then your financial fund management. And then lastly is auditing. So financial capacity is, do you have sufficient local resources and required match to carry out the proposed project? So that's always first and foremost. And I think obviously if you're applying and you have your budget, typically you do. And that's pretty straightforward for capital. That is not as challenging, other than the fact that you have to look at the outlying years for insurance, fuel, maintenance, things of that effect. For operating, it carries an ongoing component that you need just to make sure that you can do it in that manner that you're carrying out for each of the years that you're receiving the operating dollars for. And then you also must have basically to keep the vehicle going, to provide backup. If you have one vehicle, do you have agency vehicles? What do you do, and how do you ensure the useful life and adequate continuing operation of that vehicle so that the success of what you're applying for and meeting the needs of your constituents or your agency personnel or individuals that are all being met? Local match must be in cash. It has to be something that DOPT finds. Now, there's different kind of levels of cash, and there's different areas you can acquire this. And DOPT often works with you, or you can ask different modes. So it could be via other contracted service you're doing. It could be if you had a sale of a previous vehicle, things to that capacity. It could be other federal grants can match FTA federal money. So that's another aspect. So there's different ways you can use cash to go ahead and match the operation or capital that you're doing for the needs of your agency. And then income from contracts to provide human service transportation can be either used of one of two ways. You can reduce the net project cost, or you can provide the local match for the operating assistance. Basically it's the old pay up front or pay later kind of component, and DOPT is comfortable with either as long as that in your budget and in your description, your application, you're able to go ahead and meet those requirements and provide the sufficient funds for the services that you're providing. So in the workbook, we're going to ask, what is your current financial status? Has it changed? Do you foresee it changing? Are you stable in that regard? And what are your source and kind of what's the stability of the local shares that you're receiving and how that funding is being provided? And then also any local share certification. So if it is through the county or it is a human service agency, something that kind of documents that they're providing that, and if it's ongoing, kind of that stability of what they can provide and what they are providing. So in terms of fund management, it's that you must have, systems of account for and report on Selection 5310 assistance. So, how are you able to do it? What is your accounting system? Are you able to go ahead and document? Are you able to track, especially if you have multiple grants? What is your system in place and what does it look like? If you have an indirect cost plan or cost allocation plan, what that is, who's the cognizant agent, has it been approved, how's it being applied? Those are things that we'll look at, as well as the operating budget must be tracked against expenses. We want to look to make sure you're doing that monthly, and then see, who's responsible for that. Is there checks and balances, things of that capacity to ensure that the fund management is being done in that manner. So what are we looking at? We're going to look at expenses tracking procedures, how you're doing that, if it's for maintenance or if it's for others, how you're tracking that on a month-to-month basis. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you have an indirect cost plan or cost allocation plan, we're going to ask for you that submitted, as well as the approval of that, and then how that's being applied to your program. And then the last thing on this section is audit. And so what we want to do, and not necessarily if you just have an audit for transportation, we're looking at your agency audit, because what we want to make sure is that one, that is if you meet the federal threshold requiring an audit, you must go ahead and provide it. And then it's changed slightly since the 2020. So in 2024, at the end, I guess it was, April, it went up from 750,000 to 100 million in federal funds for a single audit conducted. And then part of your responsibilities is, if you do have a single audit, that you must notify DRPT of any audit related findings, especially if it's pertinent to 5310. And so what we're going to do is ask, if you do have an audit, regardless of the fact if it was this or anything, just to provide this to us so we can review it, to ensure that there are nothing in there that pertains specifically to the Transportation 5310 funding that you're receiving. All right. Sarah, is this where you're jumping in? I forget. I apologize.
No, you got a few more slides.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, before I do that, just does anyone have any questions? I know I'm talking probably quickly. I tend to do that. I just like to, go on. If not, you guys might be lucky and be out of here pretty quickly. I know we planned on a long period of time, but not necessarily. But yeah, I wanted to go ahead and open it up to questions before we moved on to this next section. All right, coffee hasn't kicked in yet. We'll keep going. All right, so satisfactory continuing control. So what does that mean?
I had a quick question.
Of course, please ask.
Thank you. So I'm at a fairly big organization that has different programs.
Okay.
So like the program that we use the buses for is different than the other programs. What we do our budget for everything together. Do you want the budget for everything together, or do you want just for that specific program?
That's a great question. So how do you typically, is it by department and then they work to put theirs together and then you do an overall budget, or how would you put together your budget? Let me ask by that.
Yeah, sure. So our finance department, so we have a finance overhead until recently a CFO and all of that. The departments come together to put in a whole budget, and then that goes under one bucket per se. So we do have access to the other information, but it's easier for us to get access for the entire budget. So it's just, what do you guys want? I just want to make sure we do what you need.
So typically what we would do, at least I would do, is see if there's a line item in your budget that would be transportation. And then if that's the case, often that would be probably close to, my guess is close to your application that you submit to DRPT. So if those line up, you could probably just give us your application and then your overall budget and then the approval of that budget. If it doesn't, then we would ask, okay, can you kind of help us out and understand, your department or others, how you put that together? Does that answer that? Does that address it?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So I'll use, just to make sure I understand what you're saying, I'll use the application that we submitted, and then if there are any questions, we can go into that detail. But I'm new to the process, so I just wanted to make sure I understood.
No,
So thank you.
that's a great question, especially if they match up. I mean, we're not looking to add duplicative work for you or add anything extra. I mean, if they match up and that's the process, then, absolutely, we would just want to see the overall budget, the overall number, and that approved by your board and in the minutes or somewhere, and then the application that tied to it would be totally fine. A great question.
Hey, Joel,
Joel, would-
there's a request to go back one slide.
Sure. All right.
Just looking at the chat.
Audit
Yeah.
one or the?
To this one. Page 19. Yeah.
All right. What's the question?
I don't know if there was a question about this slide, but we did have a question asking if when this starts, if we have like loose dates for our timeline yet.
So so these are two different things. Often people confuse us and think we are doing an audit. We're not doing an audit. We're doing a compliance review. And an audit is something that is required by whether you meet the threshold or either FTA or even the federal government. So I just want to make sure I'm clearly understand. So in terms of the compliance review, if that's the question.
Yeah, the compliance review.
Okay, so Jess is going to be reaching out probably, and we're working on dates. My guess, and we haven't solidified this completely, is that this wouldn't start until probably May, late May, mid to late May or June, definitely June, but May might be the first, one or two that we get started. And then we're going to start ramping up through the summer and the fall, as that process, and even go into the winter, depending on individual schedules. So because there's so many of them, we're not going to do them all at once. But yes, so they'll be starting late spring and then definitely into the summer and fall months. Lucinda, I saw you had something pop up. Did you have a question? Oh, that was your question? Okay. All right. So in talking about your vehicles and your equipment management, we want you to maintain control over those. So obviously that kind of means, a number of things. Can you have records of them? Can you account for them? Are you keeping up-to-date information on mileage, your maintenance, things like that? We will ensure that they're being used for the appropriate thing that you described in your application. So if you get in your application and all of a sudden you're using this vehicle for something completely different, that's something that's going to raise a red flag. It doesn't mean that if you have certain aspects that you need to utilize your vehicle for, you can't, but the primarily component is that it needs to be used for what is described in your application to DRPT. And then any changes in ownership or even use must be approved by DRPT. And that's overall like majority use. So if you use it, for a kind of like a minor change, or your agency all of a sudden adds a new run to their service, that is not something that DRPT is going to worry about, especially if it's in the confines of what the ultimate description of use of was for that vehicle. We want you to make sure you obtain an inventory and submit with DRPT's application of that. And then DRPT has what they call a overall inventory of their capital Trans Am that they need to report to FTA on an annual basis. And then they also have other aspects and collection things that they want to make sure that they're reconciling the vehicles that they have an interest in to what you have that on your records. The last thing that you need to have, and it's very critical, and most of you probably have it already, or at least you should, and kind of scared if it isn't, is your insurance. And there's both collision and liability insurance. And not that you only have that, it needs to meet the threshold of what the requirements are. So you need to carry enough insurance to protect FTA and state interest in the vehicles or equipment. So basically funded at 80%. And then your liability needs to be at least 1 million of the FTA funded vehicles. So you can go over this, especially if that is your agency policy, but at a minimum, you need to carry that much. And what we'll come to is we'll get ahead and look at your certificate of insurance. That's something we'll request on all the 5310 capital that you have currently that DRPT has a interest in. And then as well as we're asked for your FTA funded asset inventory. If it's even one vehicle, it doesn't matter. It could be an Excel sheet and just listing that. And often what we recommend is having that vehicle, documenting the date of purchase, the description of the vehicle, the funding that you use for that. So you can commingle your vehicles, but we want to make sure that the 5310 vehicles stand out, the year, the current mileage, and then basically, so that way you have a running record and they have a running record of the eligibility of when potentially that vehicle could be replaced. So an ongoing listing of that inventory. So that gets to what we were talking about. So, okay, my vehicle now has met its useful life. I'm ready maybe to dispose of it. And what is that process? So DRPT our vehicles are titled to the state. They hold the title until vehicles meet their useful life. And then the title is signed over to the grantee. And note, the service life begins the date the vehicle is placed in service. So not when you get it, the date it goes into service, and you are actually then transporting individuals based on what you applied for in the grant. And then you must meet the thresholds for DRPT to go ahead and approve disposition of vehicles and equipment. Just because it meets the threshold, you can't automatically do it. You have to write DRPT either email or other documentation, typically email. I think that's how we all do it now, and getting approval of that any disposition request. So at that point, you're going to request the title and obtain prior written approval, as we mentioned, to DRPT before selling, leasing, or disposing of a vehicle, even has no remaining federal or state interest. So it could be 10 years old and it could, have 500,000 miles. It doesn't matter until you get that prior approval from a DRPT. You cannot do that. And then if you do sell the capital, FTA share must be accounted for in the disposition of property and equipment, especially if it did not meet its useful life. And so we'll go over that in a little more detail in the sense that, how much did you sell it for? Did it meet certain criteria? As well as the funds for that. So records of the property and vehicle disposition must meet its useful life. And then we'll also want you to either document or something that any proceeds of funding go back into the transportation program. So a little more into the disposition requirements. So this is required by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and that there's been a slight change recently to FTA. And that change is basically just the threshold, the amount that that you have to basically report and give shares back to FTA. But before that, we just want to make sure when anything you provide to DRPT, you need to provide the VIN, the year, and the make and model, in-service date, and the current mileage of the vehicle. And then at that point, you'll receive the lien, recipient will receive lien release letter and title if DRPT approves that. And then you're required to obtain a clear title from the DMV prior to selling or transferring the vehicle. So again, this agency is required to obtain that. DRPT does not do that. And then any sale of the vehicle, you need to report to DRPT. So here's the change. In the previous to this past year, that if your proceeds are more than $5,000, FTA requested a share of any proceeds that went above that. So again, try to sell it for as much as possible. You're not going to get anything, you don't want to play the game of, oh, we did it less, because if anything, you're just hurting yourself, because you're still going to get additional proceeds. It's just anything over that, part of the funds go back to FTA. But now that threshold is $10,000. So, for example, you would retain funds plus the percentage of the state and or local share in additional to that amount. So if it was 20,000, 10,000 you would receive, and then the next 10,000, a percentage of that would go back to the state and or local share to the FTA. But again, you want to make sure you maximize the dollar amount because you want that to go back into your transportation program. And then the subrecipient, as we talked about, must return the balance to DRPT as a pass-through to FTA. And then proceeds must be used for transit purposes. So again, it's for capital, it's for the purchase of fuel, it's for operating, but you have to document that any proceeds are going back into the transportation program. Yes, Michael. Can you unmute yourself, Michael? I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank
Okay,
you.
good. So you keep saying the proceeds need to go back to transportation funds. So when we have multiple divisions and departments, we sell it, that money goes back to that department as a whole and not directly into a transportation fund.
So when you say department, do each of your departments individually have a 5310 vehicle? Explain that a little to
Correct.
me.
Correct. So
That's okay as long as it's their specific and it goes back to, again, the use of the transportation for that department. That's okay, but it can't, for example, go to, let's see, let's say you have a daycare program that doesn't receive transportation, adult daycare. You can't go to that. It has to be the intent and purpose of supporting the transportation for that department. Does that make sense?
it does. I
Okay.
think what we do,
But it can be department by department.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? All right.
All right, well, I will continue presentation from here. So the next section we're going to talk about is personnel, and we're going to go into equal employment opportunity, or EEO, and then drug-free workplace. So with equal employment opportunity, the requirements are to ensure that there is no discrimination against any employee or applicant for employment because of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, age, or physical or mental disability. And with this, you as an agency are required to post notices that's going to set forth your EEO policy in both a conspicuous and accessible place. And you're also required to make sure that there is notice of the EEO policy, both to employees and any applicants that are going to be seeking employment with you guys. So with all of this, your reviewer is going to ask one for your EEO policy statement to make sure that you guys have it and are adhering to the proper requirements with that. And we're also going to be looking at any EEO complaints if you do get any. A reviewer is also going to be, as Joel had mentioned quite a while ago, looking at a sampling of either a job application, a job posting, or a job advertisement, because you are required to have your EEO statement somewhere on there for people to see, which is going to make notice to those applicants of your EEO policy. So we will be looking for that. We're also going to take a look at your website, make sure again that you have your EEO policy and statement somewhere on your website. Make sure that it is available and accessible in multiple places. Are there any questions about EEO? Oh, I see Joel unmuted himself.
And this is something, Sarah, one of the things we do typically when we're on site, but obviously we're virtual, have a hard time. We might start asking a few times, for example, your bulletin board in your common area, can you please take a picture of your EEO poster or others? And we might ask that for a couple other ones just to ensure that there is visibility of these requirements for, as Sarah mentioned, employees or others, who work in your agency.
Yeah, that's great to mention. I'm very used to doing these in person. So thank you for reminding me of that, Joel. Are there any questions from you guys before we move on to the next section? All right. So drug-free workplace. As an agency, you guys, as grantees and both contractors, if you do have any, are required to maintain a drug-free workplace for all of your employees, as well as you are required to have an ongoing drug awareness program. So with this, we are going to look at your drug-free awareness program overall, make sure, again, you guys are adhering to any requirements. We also want to make sure that any drug-free workplace notices are going to employees, including the policy statement, any type of condition of employment, kind of what they have to adhere to should there be an issue with drugs or alcohol. So we will be taking a look at that, making sure that you guys are adhering to that. We also are going to be asking that you provide any notices of employee drug convictions to, again, make sure that you guys are adhering to the correct requirements should those scenarios arise. Are there any questions on drug-free workplace? No. Okay. So the next big section is maintenance. There are a lot of requirements for you guys to adhere to. The first one, first and foremost, being maintaining FTA and or DRPT funded vehicles and equipment, including those accessibility equipment. You have to have a written maintenance plan, both for vehicles that includes accessibility features. So that could be the lift or wheelchair ramp and other accessibility features of the vehicle. You guys are required to have a procedure that is going to track when your preventative maintenance inspections are due and be able to schedule those preventative maintenance inspections within a timely manner. And you are required to meet manufacturing specifications. If you wish to kind of make those requirements a little more stringent, that is fine, but you are kind of at minimum required to follow manufacturing specifications. You guys also have to have a process for tracking and pursuing warranty claims, because if the vehicle still has a warranty, both DRPT and FTA is going to look to make sure you guys are utilizing that warranty when applicable. You also need to maintain a file on each piece of equipment. So for that includes the daily logs, inspection checklists, as well as any repair records for each vehicle and other equipment. You also have to have a driver pre-inspection program. And with this program, we want to make sure that you guys are addressing the vehicle condition, the appearance and cleanliness of both the outside and the inside of the vehicle, any safety of the vehicle, as well as any ADA accessible equipment. And with all of this, we want to make sure that you guys then are able to repair any deficiencies in a timely manner. And in order to do so, a lot of that starts with the daily pre-trip inspection program. Yeah, Joel.
One of the things that we'll talk about too that we didn't put in here is in terms of warranty or other things, it's critical for you to notify DRPT. And you might think, well, why is that important? That as individual agencies, you're maybe receiving one vehicle, maybe sometimes more, but DRPT is buying multiple, dozens, if not even more. And so if they hear of the same problem occurring often, it gives them the ability then to go back to the manufacturer or their supplier and address this. But if they're not being notified of it, they don't know if there's problems going on or isolated things that they can hopefully correct and rectify ongoing. So that's another reason you want to, stay in contact with DRPT and not minimize anything that's happening. Others might be having the same problem, and they would definitely want to make sure they can correct that and address that.
Yeah, so overall maintenance is really more than an oil change. We're looking for much more kind of maintaining of your vehicles. And it really focuses also on the accessibility as well as safety equipment. So, the wheelchair lifts and ramps, we're going to be looking in your written vehicle maintenance plan to make sure that you guys have a number of cycles that you are using for inspecting the wheelchair lifts and ramps, and that you guys are adhering to that, as well as kind of in your daily driver pre-inspection checklist that you are cycling the lifts every day. It also focuses on fire extinguishers, bidirectional reflective triangles, etc. So a lot of those times, if there's an accident or incident that happens, there's a lot going on. But we also want to make sure that during those times, if any of the safety equipment is being utilized, that it's also being replaced. And then we also want to make sure that, for example, the fire extinguishers are being checked and they aren't expired, so that if you do need to use something, it is there for you. It also focuses on emergency exits. Again, we want to make sure that every aspect of the vehicle is working, has been looked at, and nothing is kind of going to the wayside. So your reviewer, oh, I see someone is unmuted. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. This is Jeff Engel in PSR in Farmville, Virginia. Good morning. Do we have, or does Sunny Merriman have like some basic templates for these sort of things? I mean, I can picture how to put this together, but not trying to reinvent the wheel if we've already got something for the most common vehicles used.
Yeah, so that's definitely something you can check with other agencies. You can always reach out to Jess. Your reviewer can also, once that's set, can also give you templates that can be utilized to create these documents if you don't have them. If that's something you're looking to do, you don't have them now and you're looking to get that done, I would suggest reaching out to Jess, and she'll be the best contact to make sure that you guys get any templates that you do need to create these documentation.
All right, thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, of course. So with maintenance, your reviewer, again, is going to be looking at your written vehicle maintenance plan to make sure that you have all proper sections and all requirements. We're also going to be taking a look at your preventative maintenance checklist. Again, make sure accessibility vehicles are on, accessibility features are on there, as well as many other sections of a checklist. We're going to ask for your procedures on how you track preventative maintenance activities to make sure, again, that you are tracking everything properly. You make sure that you know what is going on with your vehicles, when and if it would need to be pulled from service, things like that. We're also going to be looking at your vehicle preventative maintenance inspections. If we were on site, this is something we might do while we were there. But because it is virtual, we're probably going to be asking for those to be sent to us. And depending on how many vehicles your agency has in the 5310 program, sometimes if you have less, we might just look at one vehicle if that's all you have. If you have multiple, we might pick up to 3 vehicles. And we're basically checking to make sure that you guys are on time with this. And that being said, the rule of thumb is that for a single vehicle, you need to be hitting at least 80% to be considered on time. It's great if you are above that. We love to see that. But 80% is the minimum that you need to hit to be considered on time for preventative maintenance inspections. We're also going to be asking to look at your warranty claim records, kind of like as Joel mentioned before. One, we want to make sure you're utilizing them, but we also want to make sure that you guys, if anything does happen, are talking to DRPT about it and letting them know. We're going to be looking at your daily pre-trip inspection forms. So again, we want to make sure that your drivers or whoever else is looking at the vehicles before they go on to service are looking at every possible scenario and outcome for the vehicle and making sure that a vehicle is not being put into service if, for example, the wheelchair lift is not working. That's something that you want to make sure you're checking beforehand. We also are going to ask for your repair records for deficiencies. Again, we want to make sure with that daily pre-trip inspection form that you guys really are inspecting the vehicles and not putting a vehicle in service that should not be in service. We also, if you guys give any vehicles or facilities to private contractors to utilize, we are going to be looking at those contracts to make sure that you guys are monitoring them correctly, because it will fall on you if they are your subcontractors. You need to make sure that you are carefully monitoring them throughout that process. And generally when we're on site, we will tour the maintenance facility. It's a little harder to do when we're virtual. So there could be a possibility that if possible, we might ask you for pictures of certain things within that maintenance facility. Are there any questions for maintenance? I know it's a really kind of big section. All right, if you think of any, pop them in the chat or raise your hand. The next section that I'm going to go over is service provision, and that's both going to include service eligibility as well as meal delivery and incidental use. So service provision. The requirements for you guys, a section 5310 vehicle must be used for transportation projects as described in your grant application, which Joel mentioned a little earlier in the training. DRPT and FTA really want to see you guys use these vehicles for the intended use. However, they do encourage maximum use of the vehicles that are funded under Section 5310, but they need to first be used for program-related needs. As long as any other service is not going to interfere with their original funded project activities, a vehicle can be used to meet other transportation needs of the community. And use of Section 5310 vehicles for coordinated human service transportation that primarily serves elderly persons or persons with disabilities is an acceptable use, excuse me. So like I said, overall, the vehicles are meant to be utilized first and foremost for the projects that are described in the grant application, but can be used for other transportation needs as long as it's not going to affect the original intended use. So your reviewer is going to ask for any agency brochures that you have, as well as any client materials that you guys have. And this is really to kind of get, again, a better understanding of the services you guys have and provide, and be able to, for us to be able to recognize if you are using the vehicles to provide those intended services, and if there's other services being utilized, that it's not interfering with anything. So then that brings me to meal delivery and incidental use. Incidental use of a Section 5310 vehicle on an occasional or regular basis, such as a meal delivery, again, cannot result in a reduction of service to elderly or persons with disabilities. So if you say you guys have a meal delivery service that you do on a monthly basis, say it's always Tuesday at 10 a.m. If there is another request for someone to get, say it's to a doctor's appointment, and they request that Tuesday at 10 a.m., that would need to be the intended service first before the meal delivery, because you cannot take away service from that population in order to do this service. And with incidental services, you need to be able to cover the operating costs that are associated with providing that service. So in order for your reviewer to get a better understanding of, one, whether you actually do any meal delivery or incidental use, we're going to be asking for both miles and hours associated with any meal delivery or incidental use, and it could be a portion of these services if you are doing, a decent number of these. If you aren't, we may look at all of your data. And we're also going to want to look at your meal or incidental use arrangements. So again, if you have something on a regular basis, we're going to want to see kind of those arrangements and how they're set up. We also are going to be looking at how you track miles, hours, cost, any type of accounting associated with these services, just to make sure that you guys, one, are tracking, especially those operating costs that might be associated with the incidental services, as well as mileage of the vehicle. Any questions about any service provisions or meal or incidental uses? Okay. So the next section I will talk about is safety and security. I know Joel sort of touched on this ever so slightly, but the requirements for you guys are to have a written accident or incident procedures. We want to make sure that your drivers and other staff know what to do if there were a scenario to arise of an accident or an incident. And with that, you guys, like Joel mentioned, need to report to DRPT immediately when that does happen. So that needs to be written in your plan. you guys are also required to document drivers having a valid operating license, having a safe driving record, as well as being trained. For that training, it is recommended 6 hours. Again, you can go over that. You do not have to stop at 6 hours. If you're able to do more, that's great. But at minimum, there needs to be 6 hours and it needs to be documented in the driver file. The next requirement is that you need to maintain safety devices in operative condition. So that includes the bloodborne pathogen kit, first aid kit, the fire extinguisher, bidirectional reflective triangles, and web cutters. And so, like I mentioned before, you want to make sure that if these are being utilized, that they are being replenished each time. And that's something that is also great to have on the daily inspection trip form. And we also want to make sure, again, that those fire extinguishers are not expired. So it's good to check those on a regular basis. You're also required for drivers to wear their seatbelt, but in some instances, passengers to wear their seatbelt. So with this, you can't just specify one passenger to wear a seatbelt. If you do, all have to wear the seatbelt. You do need to have a cell phone policy. That is a requirement. And then you also need to require that smoking is prohibited on all vehicles. And mostly this is because we want to make sure that the drivers are able to focus and that we are limiting the number of distractions. We can't take them all away, but we can try and help make that as little as possible for them. So your reviewer is going to come in and ask for driver files. You may redact personal information. We're not looking to see what their name and social security number is. We are mainly just looking to make sure that you have, again, that valid operator's license, the safe driving record, and training. They're also going to be asking for training records. They could be asking for more than what is just in the driver file. A good rule of thumb is to keep an agenda and or a sign-in sheet for training. It kind of helps your reviewer as well as you guys have a better documentation of training, when it's happening, what is being covered, how long it was, and who was attending. And then your reviewer is also going to look at your procedures for accidents and incidents. So they're going to be looking at that written procedure to make sure that you guys have the correct procedures written, and then with that you guys are also following that should a scenario arise where there is an accident or an incident. Are there any questions on safety and security? Yes, I see one hand raised.
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to know in what instance, because when I was looking at the it said up there there are certain instances where clients don't wear in some instances passengers must wear seat belts. So what are the instances where they're not? Or am I misinterpreting that?
So I may have maybe not interpreted or said it correctly, but basically what we're trying to say is that if you guys have a written procedure where you require specific passengers to wear a seatbelt, that's not allowed. All passengers would have to wear a seatbelt or no passengers. And so this is kind of what, unless Joel, I don't know if you
No,
can
she's
explain
exactly
it any better, but
a lot of this stems from ADA, where, for example, securing a wheelchair and requiring them to wear a seatbelt, you cannot only require an individual in a wheelchair wear a seatbelt, you have to require all passengers. So basically, it's a universal policy that you have to have, is what we're going with, that you can't isolate or identify just one kind of individual. It has to be an all or nothing.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? All right. Well, that brings us to Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. So with the requirements here, you guys as 5310 grantees are prohibited from discriminating against persons with disabilities by FTA grantees, and ADA includes a few different sections. There is vehicle accessibility. So your service must be accessible when viewed in its entirety. employment practices, there needs to be reasonable accommodations for employees within your agency should it be requested, and general service requirements. So for general service requirements, there are a lot of different areas. The first one is that you guys are required to have an ADA policy that does cover all and any aspects of ADA in its entirety. So with this, you want to make sure that you're ensuring staff is trained to proficiency so that, for example, if any scenario arises, they are able to handle the situation properly. So for example, that could be wheelchair lifts. Wheelchair lifts do also need to be utilized by standees should they ask. So if someone who, for example, to the naked eye, you may not first suspect that they have a disability. If they ask to use the wheelchair lift, you cannot deny them that service. With wheelchair use, Joel kind of got to this in the last slide a little bit, that you can't deny someone a ride even if their wheelchair is difficult to secure. So again, both of these, I understand we've had the questions before of, we don't want someone to fall if they're standing on the wheelchair lift. We don't want someone to hurt themselves if we can't secure their wheelchair. And we hear you, we totally understand, we see your side of it. But again, overall, we're making sure that there is no discrimination being happening, as well as making sure that you guys are not going to be then receiving any ADA complaints because that person felt like they were denied a service for the wrong reason. And again, you cannot mandate a rider in a wheelchair to use a seatbelt or a shoulder harness unless all passengers are required to use a seatbelt. And so that was what Joel was kind of getting to in the last section, is that, if you don't require your regular passengers to wear seatbelts, then you cannot require a wheelchair user to use one either. Assistance. So this goes back to ensuring staff are trained properly. Drivers need to be able to assist riders with both the lift, ramp, and any securement that may come with the wheelchair. Service animals. This is always an area that gets some questions. Service animals need to be allowed. And with that, there's only a couple of questions that you guys can ask, which would be, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Or service animal, they're not always dogs. But you do need to allow them. I know that there's a lot of issues right now with ESA animals, which is different than a service animal. And with ESA animals, that is up to the agency if you guys want to have a policy on that. But again, it can get really tricky on deciphering. But a service animal has to be accepted. And portable oxygen also needs to be accepted. Again, sometimes it can be difficult on the vehicles. However, you cannot deny someone a service for that reason. You guys are required to have complaint procedures, whether you get an ADA or EEO or Title VI complaint. We always suggest that you guys have some type of log so that if you do get a complaint, you're able to track it. Who had the complaint? What was the complaint about? What was the category of it? And what was the resolution? And that, again, is something that if you guys would like, you can reach out to Jess and she will provide something, or you can reach out to Joel or myself and we'll make sure that you guys get some type of example to utilize if you would like that. And the last thing is that you are required to fully maintain all accessibility features, whether that is for any facilities or vehicles. So I know that was a lot, and I know this list looks very short, but we will be asking for your ADA policies, the written ones that you have, which will include your complaint form. So we will look at both of those to make sure they are correct. We are also going to look at your website to make sure that we can find your ADA policies and the complaint form online. We will also be reviewing vehicle accessibility, which again, normally we would look in person when we're on site, and we would go onto one or more vehicles in your 5310 program and make sure that, the bloodborne pathogen kit was there and full, that the fire extinguisher was there and not expired, that the web cutters were visible and, accessible to the driver, and etc. However, we may ask you for some pictures of things on specific vehicles, so that we can see that you guys do in fact have those features. And again, we would also be asking for, can you go back a second, Joel? Thank you. We would also be asking for any ADA complaints if you get them, to make sure that you guys are tracking them correctly. Yes, I see, Jason, you have your hand up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. So on the ADA policies on the website, again, I haven't looked at everything in my Title VI plan off the top of my head, but is that where you're looking for it? I
No,
assume
so
it's
we're
in
not looking
Okay.
In your Title VI plan. This is a separate written plan that needs to be also on the website, if that is helpful to you.
And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be the complete plan. It's your kind of ADA policies for individuals, just in terms of, for example, the complaint form or how to file a complaint, things that are key aspects. And the workbook will discuss kind of what you need to have in there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions on ADA or any of the previous sections that we've gone over so far? All right, well, I'm going to hand it back to Joel to continue with the rest of the sections.
Thanks, Sarah. So another component that often individuals kind of blend together, and what you can do, and we'll discuss a little more, is as complementary, I shouldn't even say complementary, as a separate requirement is Title VI, and that's non-discrimination in service delivery. So FTA, as well as hopefully everyone, prohibits discrimination on the grounds of race, color, national origin, and delivery of public transportation and public transit service. They also prohibit discrimination on grounds of low income status. So what is required by all, and DOT oversees this, is the DOT approved Title VI program. And the majority of you, especially if you just recently are not new recipients and had it, is just this past recently when we went ahead and worked with you to update your Title VI program, and in terms of what is needed, the demographics and those kind of aspects. But for you and going forward, it's kind of even a little more than that, and things that we're going to look at. So we know, or hopefully we know, that you've gone ahead and you approved your Title VI program. But also what we also need to look at is kind of the components behind it. For example, the plan needs to include notification of rights, and where is that published and listed? Public outreach and inclusive of public participation. So if you've made changes or advertise or different things in that aspect of what is your outreach? And we know you don't serve the general public, and this is also a common kind of confusion or such. But even so, we want to make sure your individuals that you serve, they know what their rights are in terms of service delivery that is directly to them, and what is your outreach policy for them specifically. And the LEP plan is the limited English proficiency plan. It talks about if other languages are required for individuals who might access your services that you're providing. Complaint process is the one that often can be commingled with ADA. It doesn't have to, but we'll talk about that a little more in terms of what is required, and if you do that, what it needs to look like or what it needs to address. And then if you have boards, non-elected boards, I should say, what is the minority representation? How do you go about identifying or trying to be inclusionary in terms of what your board looks like. Title VI complaints must be reported to DRPT immediately. A receipt of that complaint, so similar to other aspects that need direct and immediate notification, this is one. So what are we going to review? We're going to look at your agency Title VI plan and DRP approval. So we want to make sure that it has been approved. It's been approved by your board and when that was approved. So we'll look at board minutes or some kind of approval process. Your notification of public Title VI rights. What we often recommend, and this was actually should be listed in your plan, is where is this published? It needs to be in more than one place. So often what we recommend is your website and on board your vehicles, but that doesn't have to be the only areas, but those are two of the more visible areas that these can be presented. Have you had any Title VI complaints? And as Sarah mentioned earlier, a lot of times what we recommend is one universal complaint log. And then once you identify what that complaint is, where is it then theoretically moved to the next level? Would it be an ADA complaint? Would it be a Title VI complaint? And then the process of making that determination and then seeing that through. My gut tells me 98%, if not more, don't ever receive complaints. It's just not common. But if you do, you have to have a mechanisms or a means to go ahead and document it and determine what type of complaint that is. And then what is the process for addressing that complaint? And then, as I mentioned, the Title VI postings, is it on your website? Is it on site there, your vehicles, other? So we want to make sure that that's documented for us. And then, as Sarah talked about earlier and I did, we might ask you to take pictures or things to show where that is being basically displayed for individuals to know that that is out there for them to view. Title VI is also one that gets a lot of questions. Is there any questions before we move on? And again, this isn't your last opportunity. These are things that we can work on throughout the process with you, when either before we have your review or even during your review. All right, charter bus. So FTA wants to make sure that FTA funded equipment and vehicle and other facilities are not used to provide service paid by a third party that is not open to the general public. So for example, what they want to make sure is you're not utilizing federal funds to then offset private opportunities to provide service. So agencies are prohibited from using federally funded equipment to provide charter service, except in accordance with the allowable exemptions or exceptions. So there's a list of exemptions and exceptions that document what you're allowed to do under what might be considered charter. So otherwise, charter service is defined as transportation provided at the request of a third party for the exclusive use of a bus or van for a negotiated price, or transportation provided to the public for events or functions that occur on an irregular basis or for a limited duration, and a premium fare is charged that is greater than the usual or customary fixed route fare, or the service is paid for in whole or in part by a third party. So it's got some strict definitions in terms of what constitute what charter service would be. So what we often require, and DRPT agrees with, is that we want you to have a written charter bus policy. Even if your policy is we do not provide charter bus service, we want to make sure it's documented and understood that that is what you're doing. Let's say you happen to provide service that fits in one of the exemptions or exceptions realms, and we can talk about that in greater detail when we get out to you. You need to have record of that transportation beyond those program purposes. So you need to be able to report to DRPT, and there's a list of things that you need to do. You need to report typically it's the date, who was transported, the type of service, and those aspects. And one of the reasons why is, and you probably see that DRPT collects on an ongoing basis the charter service trips that you provide. And often you're going to reply 0. And the reason is they have to report quarterly to FTA the number of trips. But if they're not asking you, they don't know whether you're putting 1, 3, or 0, which is why they even if you are doing 0, that they make these requests of record information that they can go ahead and capture. So as I talked about a little earlier, there's charter service exemptions. And exemptions are for transportation for oversight, private charter operators, emergency preparedness planning and operation, Section 5310 for program purposes. So for example, if you have a group of individuals and part of your program purposes is that they and only they are going to a special trip to the community center to see a play, that would be for program purposes if it falls under what you are if what you described in your process of application, then that would be allowable. Emergency response, and then transportation to training for non-urbanized areas only. So those are exemptions. So what are exceptions? There are a few exceptions. So for government officials on official government business, qualified human service organizations. Yes, do you have a question?
I do. So for the exclusions,
All right, let's go back. Hold on one second. Exemptions or exceptions?
Exemptions.
Okay.
So I work for CES and we transport individuals to and from work.
Okay.
And we have a private pay section as well for the same group of individuals that may have intellectual or developmental disabilities. So that private pay, we do have a fee of $30 a month. Would that be an exemption that is allowable?
So it's dedicated to your
program,
agency,
yes.
Individual programs, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and you're not paid by a third party to provide that service, correct?
No, it's the individual themselves or their family.
Okay, so that would fall under the Section 210 program purposes, as well as, since it's not open and it's not for others. So yes, that would be something that would be allowable. I think we'd have to probably work with you and I think talk to DRPT and that it is allowable, but we might want to kind of work with you and just to determine what kind of documentation, if you need to do special extra reporting to them, but it is allowable.
Okay, thank you.
So when we do work with you, we can go ahead and make that determination and work with you to see, are there additional reportings that you need to do just to document that? But again, it is an allowable operation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. So government officials or on official government business, we don't always encourage this, but we also don't want you to feel the pain that you have government officials who are requesting that they receive, a tour of an area and need to utilize your services. Again, your policy doesn't have to allow it, but know that if they are pressuring you, you can do this. You just need to document and report this information to DRPT on your reporting forms that they request. The leasing of FTA funded equipment and drivers, again, it has to be documented. It has to be for specific purposes that are allowable. No registered charter provider responds to notice from a recipient. So basically, if someone puts out there that they want charter service and no qualified charter service responds, and then theoretically you are able to at that point to go ahead and provide that. If you have an agreement with a registered charter providers directly, and then there's any petitions to the administrator. So again, there's exceptions and exemptions. They're just often require additional efforts or work. My first thing is when in doubt, contact DRPT first, talk it over with them so that way they can give you proper guidance so that going into it that you are comfortable with the decision that you make. School bus is one that typically is often seen more for general public, but also for human service agencies. Again, we just want to ensure that the requirements and rules. As the bulk of individuals and agencies receiving funding do not provide school bus service. But again, we just want to make sure you understand what the requirements are. So you're prohibited from providing exclusive school bus service unless the service qualifies under an allowable exemption and is approved by the FTA administrator. So basically, we talked about that a little bit earlier, and there's additional requirements associated with that. Federally funded equipment or facilities cannot be used to provide a school bus service. So again, there's strict rules and requirements. There's strict information that you need to obtain before you're allowed to. But note, Head Start transportation is considered human service transportation and not school bus service. So if you do have it and are providing school bus, which again, I'm shocked if you did, we want to see written school bus policies and then these other areas of where you were given approval to do so to operate the school service. Coordination. So when we talk coordination takes on a lot of aspects. And I know often you as human service agencies or others provide a tremendous amount of coordination with one another through the metropolitan planning organizations, if you work with them, and even local government's assistance. But in terms of FTA coordination and DRPT, is that you need to coordinate to the maximum extent feasible with other federally assisted transportation program and sources. So with that, we want to make sure you're involved in public service planning. And more than a couple of decades ago, as part of receiving the 5310 funding, FTA started requiring that Section 5310 services be derived from what we call locally developed coordinated public transit human service transportation plan. That's a mouthful. And DRPT calls them CHISM plans, coordinated human service mobility. I got that wrong, didn't I? Plans, something like that. Just will correct me. I haven't done those in a while. These coordinated human service mobility plans is something that we're going to review to make sure, one, that you're documented in that, and two, that you're talking about, are there other coordination aspects that you're working with? And again, it's not something we know. Often you have some limitations based on the type of clients that you serve or the jurisdictions. We're not requiring anything beyond what you be in part of the coordinated plan, but often this helps because you share, or you might be able to then provide services for others or have others help you with that service. And as I mentioned, this is being updated currently. So Jess, I don't know if you want to take the time just to kind of talk about that a little bit or just give a brief update on that.
Sure, yeah. So, and I know we all talk about the CHISM plan a lot and coordination and struggles with that. But really, like Joel was kind of saying, the most important thing that you can do is participate in the CHISM plan creation and make sure that you're recorded in our CHISM plan. And so we are kicking off our current 3-year update to the CHISM plan. This is going to be a major update where we're doing a whole new inventory of services throughout the state. And I've been kind of, for those of you I work with frequently, I've been kind of prepping you a little bit for this, saying that we're going to get this started. And so we are now about to actually, I think in the first week of April, we're planning on sending out a survey to the providers to record your services. So you'll get an email to participate in the survey. The survey will be open for a month. And so again, if you're a 5310 recipient, we really do require that you fill out that survey. And then going from there, we'll be working on this plan basically all year. And there'll be more invitations for you guys to participate in different ways. But definitely fill out that survey when you get it. And obviously let me know if you have any questions at that time. But we're in that process now and just getting started. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
And most of you probably already know this based on this, but in case there are some new recipients or future recipients, part of your annual application that DRPT, it requests and identifies where in the coordinated plan you are listed. So that way it is a requirement for you to go ahead and receive future funding for any 5310 funds.
Yep.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
So that we all blazed through that. I think we obviously prep for a lot longer just in case, but we obviously know your time is valuable, and a lot of this is information that you'll have many more opportunities to ask questions on. We wanted to give you an overview of the process, what's upcoming, one, to give you this information ahead of time to let you know that we're here to help. DRPT is here to help. Again, I can't stress enough, this is an exercise to assist you with technical assistance, and as I like to say, show and prove you're doing things the right way. and where you might have some areas where you're deficient, help you get to that point where you're doing things in a manner that DRPT and FTA are very comfortable with. So I'm going to open up to any further questions or comments. Oh, sure, Michael.
Thank you again for y'all for this presentation. But question on the 6-hour driver's training when an incident occurs, can that be like a webinar? Or I know a lot of states have this defensive driving online class. Does that suffice, or does it have to be a hands-on by the agency given to that individual driver?
And Jess, I don't know if you want to take it, but no, my understanding, and Jess, you can correct, it doesn't, there are a lot of different levels of training, and obviously we don't want to dictate what you do as an agency. There's some that DRPT can kind of give you guidance on, but yes, they're definitely either online or through, other aspects, virtual or on discs or things that go ahead and training that you can provide your operators. There's refreshing training like that. But yes, it doesn't have to be hands-on in person per se. Sometimes that's the easiest way, just to make sure they're getting it and you can kind of read their faces. But by no means do we want to dictate how you provide that training.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Michael, it's that driver training is talking about when you hire a driver, and obviously there might be like refresher trainings over a certain amount of time. But yeah, like Joel mentioned, like we often recommend the PASS training, which is given by CTAV, and there's a lot of resources for that in the state. But again, like he said, we're not dictating which training you provide. It's just kind of making sure that there is some training being done.
Thank you, Jess.
Any other questions or comments? And again, I know a lot of this is until you kind of delve into your workbook and start getting your policy and procedures, you probably don't have as many, as you think, but so that'll be something that we want to make sure that, you're going to have. And then there's a question in the chat, is there access to this PowerPoint for the future review? Absolutely. So when Jess goes ahead and sends out the recording, we'll also make sure that you have access to this PowerPoint to utilize it, as a kind of a preliminary before you get your workbook to review, to fill out and review. All right. I don't know if there's anything else. Let's close with, I'm sure you all have this, but we'll have it anyway. Jess is your go-to. She's amazing. She is your first line of questioning, kind of like I would say even internally from my, people I work with, is that if I don't know the answer, and similar to Jess, I'll reach out to find someone who does know the answer. So she is definitely your point person that you want to start with, and then utilizing that resource. A lot of good questions in terms of, are there, sample policies or best practices or things like that? Do not reinvent the wheel. There's so many things out there that if you're not sure that, there's things out there to get you started. Obviously, you have to make it your own and make it specific to your agency, but we don't want you to get, bogged down or burdened with things that you might not be familiar with or that you feel might be out there, because we want to make sure we're providing you the materials that will help you and address, basically what is best suited for the agency and the services that you provide.
Yeah, and I just want to make a quick plug also, obviously, like Joel said, reach out to me, but there's a lot of great resources at the National RTAP website, so RTAP. They have tons of great resources for all types of providers, but including you guys, that you can kind of browse through. They have a whole directory of different of listings and explain things really well on there. So obviously, again, I'm your human contact, but there's a lot of great resources on there if you just kind of want to take a look and as you're sort of thinking about next steps with this process.
Great. Thanks, Kyle, for posting that into the chat. And then Jess, I'm not sure if it makes sense, even when you send out that email with the PowerPoint, maybe even including that link as well, just as a second time in case people.
For sure. We'll do that.
And that wraps up our morning. Like I said, I think we sped through that. Sarah and I are both from the north, so we probably talked too fast, but that's okay. hopefully everyone was able to, follow along. Again, thank you for your time and your participation. I know sometimes people think, well, we're only receiving one vehicle, and there's a lot to go along with these vehicles, and we appreciate your time and your effort and all that you do. But also on the flip side, it's critical that these are processed and documented the correct way, because DRPT needs to ensure that they continually to get all the federal dollars they can to go ahead and pass through to local subrecipients and human service agencies to ensure transportation can be as vibrant as possible in the Commonwealth. So with that, any last questions? Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you again for your time and your comments. Jess, thank you. As always, Jess does a great job. I'm not sure, Jess, your final thank you, and off we go.
Thanks, everyone.
you.
I really appreciate you guys participating. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.